I suppose it's a continuation from the previous question, but I think it's very, very important that we discuss this here in the House. And it's basically just whether the European Union and the Council will encourage the European Union to engage directly with President Maduro of Venezuela rather than with the fake president of the country, and whether what the Council's view is in relation to that.
The Taoiseach, and I believe your group, Taoiseach.
Well, I've semi-answered this question already.
Will you just confirm what questions you're taking?
Oh, sorry, I think we're proposing to take questions 6, 7, 26, and 27 together. Is that right?
Agreed.
That gives me a bit of time to read quite a full response into the record. As I said in answering the previous question, Venezuela is currently experiencing the worst social, humanitarian, political and economic crisis in its history. This crisis is having a dire impact on the population and has resulted in mass migration, affecting countries in the region and overall regional stability. An estimated 3 million Venezuelan immigrants and refugees have left Venezuela in the last 3 years, with the majority going to neighbouring countries. We are concerned about the unfolding humanitarian crisis in Venezuela, where the needs of the population are acute. Ireland is strongly committed to the humanitarian principles of neutrality, impartiality and independence, and supports the EU's international contact group, which has been specifically set up to try and ensure that they can bring about peaceful and democratic intervention. Ireland, along with our EU partners, has called on numerous occasions for the government of President Maduro to acknowledge the full scale of the humanitarian crisis. The refusal by the government of President Maduro to allow humanitarian aid into the country over the weekend resulted in violence and confrontation, particularly on the Colombia and Brazilian border. We condemn this violence, and I fully support the EU statement on the 24th of February, which calls on government authorities to show restraint, avoid the use of force and allow the entry of aid into the country. The statement also reiterates the EU's commitment to increase humanitarian assistance from its current levels of over 60 million for Venezuelans in need, in line with humanitarian principles. As well as addressing the humanitarian situation in the country, the EU's international contact group aims to facilitate a peaceful, democratic solution to the crisis by seeking to put in place conditions to allow for a political process to take place. The contact group had its first meeting, as I said earlier, on the 7th of February. A technical mission co-chaired by the EU and Uruguay travelled to Caracas last week in order to look at how the EU can assist with next steps and preparations for fresh presidential elections, and to assess how best to organise the delivery of aid. I very much welcome and support the high priority which the EU gives to this issue and the coordinated action which it's undertaking. Likewise, I fully subscribe to the EU common position outlined in late January, when the EU made clear that if no announcement regarding fresh elections were to be made during a specified period, then the EU would take further actions, including regarding the issue of recognition of the country's interim leadership and consideration of additional EU targeted sanctions. On the 3rd of February, in the absence of an announcement by President Maduro to call fresh elections in Venezuela, a number of EU member states began issuing statements recognising Juan Guaido as interim president of Venezuela. On the 6th of February, I joined the vast majority of other EU member states in acknowledging and supporting Mr Guaido, President of the democratically elected National Assembly, as President ad interim of Venezuela, in order for him to call free and fair democratic presidential elections. We currently share this position with 24 other EU member states. Ireland continues to call for a negotiated, democratic, peaceful solution that can bring political stability and address the people's needs. I will continue to engage on this with our EU and regional partners at the highest level. Ireland strongly rejects the suggestion of any possible military intervention in Venezuela. Any solution to this crisis must be both peaceful and democratic. So, Deputy, this has been an incremental position where an unfolding humanitarian crisis needed and needs an international response. The response to that has been a collective one by the EU. The US has taken a somewhat different approach, but the objective of all countries, whether they be from South America, North America or the EU, is to try and ensure that there is a democratic solution to this humanitarian crisis and that it doesn't continue to deteriorate in a way that results in violence.
Members, so that there'll be different supplementary questions, and hopefully the Taoiseach will cover them all. It's interesting, Taoiseach, just how we're so active in support for the unelected so-called president of Colombia, and that we let so many other humanitarian crises go right across the world, and Libya, Iraq, Yemen, South Sudan, and it's endless, but we're very active in this one. I wonder, is it we're going to look at, as a deal for us, going to be to provide a dairy or something in Colombia when we overthrow this government, like the European Union, with the European Union? Just in relation, you mentioned that the EU delegation went to Caracas to discuss how to help in Colombia. Who did they actually talk with? Did they talk to the Venezuelan government to see how they could help? And you talk about aid and that, and this crisis. This crisis didn't start when your man took over, became the Americans' puppet in Colombia. This crisis was ongoing for many years before that, and American sanctions on Colombia were in place for many years before that, but I didn't hear you or any of Europe speaking out in relation to that and the difficulties that it was causing for the Colombian people. Perhaps you'd comment on that now as well. Thanks.